everybody. Thank you for joining. This is the Swords, Spats, and Silver Chains panel. I am Sevrock in the Good Omens fandom. I'm on AO3 and Tumblr. I'm also on Facebook and on Twitter, but not by that name. On Twitter, I'm Apollo Just. So nice to see a lot of you. Oh, I'm also on Discord by Sevrock. But yes, I am so glad to be here this morning. This is going to be so much fun. Hopefully we can cover a lot because I have a lot. So what this panel is about is specifically the symbolism in Good Omens props and costumes. So this is more concerned with what's appearing on screen, the decisions that have been shared by the filmmakers in interviews and in the DVD extras, the commentary specifically. And also looking at symbolism as a kind of shortcut way to delve into themes of the show. So let's go ahead and get started. So first is the introduction. That's what we just did. I have a little slide about who I am and how I think this is going to work, because like I said, there's a lot. There is so much we could actually talk about. And then we're going to talk about, or I'm going to list some props and some costumes. And then I also have at least one poll that we can launch and see what else you guys want to talk about. Okay, so who am I? Already said, Sevrock. I have been a cosplayer for many, many years. I actually started going to cons late in life, but jumped in with both feet right away because definitely going to conventions, started out with anime conventions and then have branched off into just general geek conventions, was really how I found my people. This was one of my closet cosplays from earlier this year, with credit to 10 Years Art for posting the book Crowley, wearing the purple shirt. I was a theater major back in college. One of my greatest accomplishments was working on one of Shakespeare's lesser known and or respected works, Titus Andronicus. And at a certain point, spoiler alert, he feeds people a pie that's made with, I believe he feeds a pie of somebody's kids to them. So I had to research how to make a Roman style pie made with people. So that was really fun. I'm also somehow weaseled my way into being a producer of a horror movie. It is very low budget. I may or may not share the link. But I got to make things like Exploding Cat that had a demonic virus come out of it. So that was super fun. Also, I used to work at the House on the Rock, which, if anybody knows the American Gods by Neil, there is a very important scene that takes place at the House on the Rock. And we actually hosted a event there about almost 10 years ago. It's 10 years ago this month for the anniversary of American Gods. And we did scavenger hunts and things. This is actually, this fuzzy picture over here in the corner is a still image from about 10 years ago of Neil on Halloween dressed as Tom Baker, the Doctor Who. So that's just a little bit of some of the stuff that I have worked on, and kind of how I fell into Good Omens was actually through the American Gods event. That's where I bought my first copy of Good Omens, first of many. So I think everybody here has probably already gone through this, so you know where the chat button is. I almost lost the poll button earlier. But feel free to chat. But it's harder for me to keep up with the chat. So if you do have specific questions, feel free to throw them into Q&A. I do have the help of our host to help read and keep track of those. I'm going to try, like I said, to launch at least one poll. And so watch for a little green dot over by the poll tab to know how to do that. And then if you lose any of these things, it might be closed. Your menu might be closed. All right, so let's launch into this. So like I said, what I'm trying to do is look at choices that were made on screen and talk about how props and costumes should tie things together in a narrative, and also how they tie not just scenes and characters and connections, because we humans are connection makers. We look for symbols and we try and make sense of them. But also I'm looking at some of the themes of Good Omens and how those choices tie back to the bigger themes. Some of the themes are good and evil. I'm not saying necessarily good versus evil, but definitely say heaven, hell, right and wrong. I'm not going to get into religion too much, or necessarily God. I may touch on it because another thing I'll say is I'm not an expert at any of this. I'm definitely not an expert about religion. I'm not going to talk a lot about gender. If you went to Caspian's panel right before this one, they did a wonderful job touching on that. There's another gender panel later. So those are some of the things that I'm not going to touch on. Like I said, even, with some of the background that I pulled on, I've never written a paper on Good Omens. I've never done any of the scholarly work that there's a lot of people doing some really in-depth work on. I'm just a fan, like most of you. So just putting that out there. Talking about time in Good Omens, how certain characters play with time, what time means to humans, the fact that they're always counting down with the little signs, beginnings and endings, looking at 6,000 years, that's looking at coming at, to an end. Choices, free will, humanity and war. That one ended up being more of a theme than I expected it to, especially when you look back on the time period that the book was written and then how things were changed in the current, in the show. Cooperation, forgiveness, communication. Communication ends up being another big one that I found really interesting, between notes that people write and keep, between phone calls that happen, between the types of telephones that people use. There's a lot that talks about how people communicate, and challenging authority. And then, oh yeah, love. So obviously a big theme. So like I said, there's a lot more to talk about. There is a meta panel that is later in the programming, which I would definitely point you towards if you like some of this kind of discussion, because I believe that it's going to go much more into theories surrounding all the different ways that you can look at this show, and it's just fantastic that we have that to work with. One last thing that I'll say before we really just start talking about props and costumes is that we really can't pull the creators out of the discussion, because there's always going to be ties back. There's always going to be decisions that were made specifically because of the people who were making the show. And so this is a picture of Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett having champagne and eating at a sushi restaurant. So you'll see some of the tie back to that. I believe Neil shared this as a point when they determined that they were actually going to make a show, or were hoping to make a show. And then obviously when Terry passed away, some of that was thrown into the possibility of it not happening. And then it obviously came back through through some very ineffable ways to be real. So here's my index. So I'm kind of excited and frightened by this, but this is the list of the different props and costumes that I've kind of set out as possibilities to talk about. So I'll just read them off for people who would like to hear them. We have food and drink, globes, horse persons, and that means their costumes and their items, mirrors, notes, as I said before, ways that people talk to each other or keep track of information through notes, plants, statues, swords, specifically the flaming sword, Aziraphale sword, telephones, and then the witchy items. For costumes, I have Crowley's chain, glasses, hats, lapels, other jewelry, Aziraphale's ring, spats, tartan with a star by it, and watches. So the thought of this panel was always to be somewhat interactive. I have the sword and the chain highlighted because those are the two that I really wanted to talk about. And so those are the two that I'll start with, so you can kind of see what I'm trying for. And then we'll try and see if people have a certain direction that they want to go or a certain thing they'd like to talk about. And I would definitely like you to share in chat or in QA your own ideas of connections. The star by tartan is because it is an incredibly important part of the story, I believe. Again, I don't necessarily feel that I am have the knowledge to fully discuss it and say everything that really needs to be said, or say it in a way. Being a person, I'm in the United States, I'm not of Scottish descent. So I just felt like that was something I don't necessarily, I can point it out, we can discuss it, and if anybody has more information that they would like to go into, we definitely can. All right, so first of all, I am going to start with Aziraphale's sword. So the way that I actually went about this was to go to, and I'm going to share a couple of really good sources of information. And these are in the let's see, in the end of my presentation, and I will be sharing my slides. So if anybody wants information about these, it'll be in there. The links will be in there. But anyway, the Good Omens Meta Library, if anybody hasn't found this, please look it up if you are interested at all in symbolism, because it is a treasure trove. It's a wealth of information. So what I started with the sword was this discussion on Tumblr of people talking about if Aziraphale was good with the sword, the way that he held it, the type of sword that it was, and then comparing it with different ways that other characters interact with the sword. There was also discussion of it being, some people, I will say, said that, they thought that he was good with the sword. Some people said, well, there may be notes that he is less so. Again, I'm trying not to get into the theories and the meta of this, but I'm just sharing it as a way that I started looking into it more. The fact can be stated, I believe, that it is based on a Roman type of sword. And let me jump back here. Like I said, that link will be included in the slide if anybody wants to look it up, or you can just go to the meta library. The best thing about the meta library is that you can, the tagging there is fantastic. And so you really can just type in sword and you'll get that post that I just pulled up. And they do a lot better job explaining the idea that it is a Roman style sword. So tying the symbolism back, what swords a lot of times will symbolize is violence, war, and then I'm pulling in that the fact that Aziraphale is an angel and that he passed the sword to Adam, actually outside of necessarily God's wishes or request, that could be argued. It is, it's hard to call it a gift, looking at war and how horrible it is. But what was it? It is something that he gave away, and it is something that he gave to humanity. And I will say that I think both Crowley and Aziraphale gave different things to humanity, which can be looked at, as gifts, as well as having baggage attached, let's say. So obviously the connection to war is fairly easily made, being that the sword ends up first and foremost being given to the horse person's war. This I freeze framed because you can see the scabbard, the sheath that it's in. Also, I would say as a way to point out that war is a theme of the show, the very first word on the screen in Good Omens is war. So that I don't think can be overlooked. Another point about connection of the sword with being a Roman style sword is actually in the crucifixion scene. You will see the Roman soldiers, and one of them is pretty much holding the exact sword, the exact same type of sword. And another thing that I found that is a connection, which is more towards the hats topic, is that once Aziraphale takes on Crowley's body and goes to hell, when he is delivered to Beelzebub, the two demons on either side of them, of Aziraphale as Crowley, are wearing Roman helmets. So I think that this is, again, a direct tie back to the crucifixion scene and to, the symbolism of that, I don't think can be overlooked. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is the way that Aziraphale holds his sword. He does in the final scene when we actually see him brandish it as if he's willing to use it with two hands. And I think that is a direct callback to the way that Adam holds it. So again, a tie to humanity and a tie to the fact that that he did give a weapon, maybe not knowingly specifically war, but a weapon of defense to Adam to protect himself and to protect humans. So there you go, principality. I will just touch on another thing that I'm not really getting into, which is there are a lot of weapons in this show. There are guns, lots of guns in the paintball scene. When war is introduced, the church scene, where our fearless heroes are having guns pointed at them. They were actually removed from the birthday scene in the book. The squirt guns were turned into guns. So I think there's a lot more that could be said about that. But I also just want to touch on Crowley's weapon of choice, which is the starter crank from the Bentley. This is again something that I believe is true. In the book, it is definitely a tire iron. It is noted as such. But in the show, most people have been coming forward and saying that they believe it is the starter crank that was used to start cars. So I'm going kind of off of that. So this is definitely getting a little bit away from props, but I just want to say it anyway, which is when the Bentley explodes, Crowley has dealt with the fact that the bookstore burned and that he thought Aziraphale was gone. And, his way of dealing with that was to get sloshed. And I think that his drive back was one where he was pretty much numb. When he sees the Bentley burn, he again is kind of frozen in the fact that he is kind of in awe of the fact that this just happened. But he does shake himself out of it. And we do see him kiss something on screen. And what is it? It's the weapon. It's the piece of the Bentley that he takes with him. So I think there's a little bit of connection there that could be made with Crowley and his attachment to the Bentley, and possibly some tie back to a connection with something else that he had recently lost and had a very emotional reaction to. Also, when they go, I don't have a picture of this, I don't believe, when they go into what is sometimes referred to as the sands of time, when Crowley freezes time on the airbase, and Aziraphale and Crowley go and talk to Adam. When he restarts time, he uses the starter crank. All right. So back to the index. I'm going to talk about the chain. I'm going to try and go a little faster because I still want to ask. I see there are some questions coming in, so that's super awesome, great. Let's see. Christy, you have not missed the Maltese Falcon. Yep, we'll go ahead and we'll jump to Tartan in a moment. Okay, so, and Scree, I see yours too. Yeah, that actually, I don't know if I have it up. There's a link in here to the person who did a transcription of the behind the scenes information from the DVDs. It's not a complete transcription. It's mostly just touching on some of the things that come out in the behind the scenes. But that was actually where the person who transcribed that said that they believed that it was the starter crank. So I'll go with that. All right. So Crowley's chain. I joke that this whole panel was just so I got a chance to talk about Crowley's chain. It is kind of true. And thank you to the Falcon hosts for allowing me this gratuitous exploration. So again, this is not to talk about headcanons. I've read some glorious fics about where the chain came from, where it could have come from, all different. I mean, and I love them all because I'm just like enamored with the whole idea of the chain. So this, again, is just trying to tie it to the themes of what's going on the screen. So the first time that we see just a peek of the chain is, of course, when we first see Crowley in the graveyard. I will say, pardon me, hydrate all. I will say that I could not find a point where he wore it in Eden. So this, I believe, was the first time that we start seeing it. So here is, in the same time period, sitting on the bench with Aziraphale, and you don't really see the chain as being very overtly displayed. In fact, you can't really see it at all. When they enter the building, walking across the water floor where one escalator goes up and the other one goes down, I mean, obviously you can't really see very closely at, seeing Crowley very closely at this point, but you don't see the chain necessarily if you watch the whole scene of him walking. I'll just make a note on chains as symbols. Obviously, talking about restriction or having someone not be fully independent. It was actually really interesting in doing this panel, research for this panel, looking at dream interpretation and dream dictionaries, because a lot of things in our subconscious, are picked up, obviously, by specific cultures that we live in, but there are some kind of universal things that kind of come out, and that seemed to be an interesting way to look at some of the symbolism. The only other time that I can think of as and feel free to chat or bring up if there was something else. The only other time I can recall a chain being used in a scene is at the Bastille. And that was very obviously, a very large, very overt chain, which Crowley just snaps Aziraphale free from. I would also point out that Crowley's chain is around his neck, which is a very vulnerable place. And when it is hidden, it's covered up. And so it's probably tucked, behind his shirt, pretty close to him. So same scene, as far as we can tell, from the one that was just pictured when he goes down into hell, is one of the most obvious times that the chain is shown. I mean, it is so out there. And I believe he's still wearing the jacket in the other scene. It just is very much there. So I'm not going to say anything yet. Later on, when they go back to humanity, to Earth, and they're on the bus having a quick discussion about the Antichrist, we can see the chain. And so this was something that I started kind of thinking about as we definitely see the chain when hell is being discussed or talked about. Looking at other times that it's somewhat overt is something that I think I would have to pay more attention to. Because like I said, this is when they're talking about the Antichrist and possibly it not going the way that they want it to go. It does somewhat disappear as he leans back. Another outfit that the chain is pretty visible with is when they visit Tadfield, and that whole entire day. So another thing to point out is that, I mean, Crowley's showing a lot of chest at this with this outfit. So it really, one would think, would be fairly easy to see the chain when the people, the producers and the makers of the show want us to see it. So throughout most of the visit to Tadfield, we don't see it. However, when we go to the bandstand, guess what's back? We see the chain a lot in the bandstand scene. So again, trying to tie, I mean, obviously hell is not here, but trying to tie the symbol of the chain and why it has been determined to be shown on screen. I'm also referencing Douglas's Everything is Meant, where I think most of the choices that are made in this show are on purpose. So much like on the bus where the Antichrist situation started going pear-shaped, obviously at the bandstand scene, there are some things that are not going the way that Crowley necessarily wanted them to go. So again, just a lot of screenshots of the chain being pretty overt there. But then we go back to open chest, a lot of visible space that could have the chain shown if it was so desired, and we don't see the chain. So although this is this isn't necessarily going the way that Crowley wants it to go, I don't think that it was in the same realm as some of the other times that the chain was shown. When we go to the airbase, again, when Crowley is upright and they're dealing with the situation at hand, we don't see the chain very much. We do see the chain when Crowley is pulled to the ground. When he falls, he is really the only person in the scene that loses his footing and actually falls. And the chain is not just visible, it is really visible, and it is laying on the ground along with him. So long story short, my own interpretation of this is that it is a connection to hell, and possibly to when the more hellish hell is more or less winning, and that is what I drew from it. Feel free to chat about other ideas. We do actually see a touch of the chain when Aziraphale is headed to hell, which I found pretty interesting. We obviously don't see it when he gets into the bathtub, so he has taken it off by then. And I don't think we see it after that. All right, so I saw some questions. I am going to, let's see. So let's go ahead and give me a moment. So some of the things that people wanted to talk about is the tartan, statues, and Aziraphale's ring. So I am going to go ahead and launch a poll. So if you would like to go to the poll tab, in a moment, and go ahead and vote on what you would like to cover. We are about, we got maybe like 20 minutes left to talk about some stuff. Let's see. Do, 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 do. Yep. Hopefully I'll be able to see the answers. So while we're waiting for the poll to be done, let's see. Karina had asked, could Crowley's chain be a symbol of his connection to Lucifer, who in the Bible was chained in the deepest, darkest pits of hell? It certainly could. As I said, I'm not a religious scholar, so I don't know a whole lot of the lore. We hear Satan referred to as Satan, and we hear Crowley refer to Lucifer and the guys. So I don't think it's a huge stretch of the imagination to connect that Lucifer and Satan exist in this universe and possibly are tied together. Also, Aziraphale references the deepest pit. And so, yes, I definitely think that that is a possibility. And there was another person that had a note about notes. Again, like I said, I'll share the slides after the fact. I will post them, and the very last slide here is some contact information for me. So that too would be something if someone wants to reach out to me and ask any more questions. I'll probably be posting this to Twitter for sure. Let's see, what else we got? Maltese Falcon. Yeah, I mean, we could, there's so much we could talk about. So Christy had asked about the Maltese Falcon prop. Partly the story of how Crowley got it, but also that the prop itself, now it's been in Good Omens, has joined the club of mythical statue falcons from other films and must have considerable value itself too in real life for whoever has it. Yeah, the whole idea behind the Maltese Falcon in the original movie. So for those of you that don't know, the Maltese Falcon does, there is a statue of the Maltese Falcon in Crowley's apartment or flat. And it has been mentioned by the creators that it is the real Maltese Falcon. And there is a whole lot of discussion that can go into what does real mean. All right, I am going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so it looks like the ring won out for now. And let's see here. I'm going to launch another poll just for kicks. I actually have a lot to say about the food, but I don't have that as one of my choices here. Okay, so let's see, where are we? No, what are we doing? Ring. All right, so Aziraphale's ring does change throughout the course of the show. And let's see here, where am I? Okay. I would love for people in the chat specifically to share information that they know. I know that there are some of you that know a ton more about this than I do. As to when it switched, I tried to screen grab different, the ring throughout the eras. And I know you can go online and see the two forms that the ring took. One of them was more specifically a signet ring, I believe it is called. Let's see, the reason the ring changes can be good fodder for fix. Okay, so a signet ring is usually a ring that is used for people to mark, they can actually, it has a symbol of themselves on it. And I don't know if it was specifically used as like when you put your mark on a wax, but that is always kind of how it appeared to me to be. The other type of ring appears more of just a winged ring. So we see it, as I said, it really is visible throughout all of all of the eras. And there's some discussion now, it looks like in the chat, that Rome could be when it switched, or sometime between Rome and the globe. And exactly why is incredibly interesting to discuss. I can't say that I have a specific reasoning behind it. The symbolism of the ring, to me, appears to relate to heaven, and also the fact that it is gold appears to relate back to making connections now to what I think we have kind of collectively referred to as angel marks, the gold marks that are on the faces and teeth of some of the angels. I will just touch on a quick note. One of the other items that I have in the presentation is other jewelry. So we can see here one of the brooches that Aziraphale wears is gold. The competing brooch, which is a snake on Crowley in the same era, is silver. And most of the time, that is the way that they divide, one wearing gold and one wearing silver. You can't really see it that well here, but there's the ring. This is a pretty good shot of the winged ring at the Bastille. We can see the ring here in St. James Park. I would say, oh yes, and along with the gold and the silver, someone just noted that besides just angel marks in general, the idea, this is never stated outright or necessarily referenced in a specific way on screen, is that it could be a representation of halos in the show. The other thing to note, not more related back to what I was saying about the people who make the show have a lot of say and a lot to do with what appears on screen. The very real fact that it sounds as if Michael Sheen needed the ring resized a couple of times, could have entered into the different types of rings. I think still though, it's the type of show that something as overt as a ring changing is, although like I said, I couldn't quite grasp when it changed. I think it is purposeful that it does change. There's definitely something that happens in Rome that seems different for both of the characterizations. And I'm not getting super into characterization, but tying that back to the fact that they share wine at that point. The fact that, well, not wine, house brown. The fact that Crowley is very obviously to that point having a bad time. And it's also a time that Aziraphale asks, Crowley to come with him as opposed to vice versa. So there's a lot that's in there. I'm gonna quick look at the chat here. So, here we have a very lovely view of the ring in 1941. So, did that tell you anything? Probably not, but hopefully it brought some ideas up in chat, some discussion that could be had about the ring. Because to be honest, I am not 100% sure of what the indication is to be made there. I did look, or tried to look, to see if other angels wore wings or wore rings. Wings, rings, well, there's a connection. It appeared at a certain point that that Michael was possibly wearing a ring in the scene where she's speaking to Ligger, but it was really hard to tell. All right, so we're 5 minutes away from ending. I'm going to read another question here. Angels seem to modernize their fashion and technology in a way that demons can't. And there is the obvious contrast between heaven and Aziraphale and hell and Crowley. Is there a difference in Gabriel's outfit compared to the other archangels? Also, your opinion on the actual contrast between heaven and hell and each headquarters and their earth agents. So I should have stayed on that Spats thing. This was actually called Sword, Sword, Spats, and Silver Chain. I don't have a ton to say about Spats. I really just did it for the alliteration. But just real quickly, the one difference that I do know about the angels and Gabriel himself is their spats. So all the angels have spats except for Gabriel. It has been referred to by Claire, the costume designer, that that she saw the suits of the angels. She referred to them in the behind the scenes as their suits of armor. So I definitely think that also in the way that the lapels appear, the angel's lapels point up. If you look at Aziraphale's, his mostly point down, at least the ones that he's wearing in the modern scenes. So that puts a differential between Aziraphale and the archangels, as the spats do with Gabriel and the other angels. All right, well, we're definitely getting down to it here. Let me see if the poll, last poll here. And like I said, I apologize, there was never going to be a way to do all this, but I really did want it to be more driven by you guys. Mirrors, ooh, nice. Okay, Karina asked, do you think Gabriel's eye color has any meaning, symbolism to it? Gabriel has violet eyes. The only thing that I will say, and this is just kind of funny, I did find an article, I believe it's on Sci-Fi, a website, where oh shoot, well, we're Gabriel, I'm trying to remember the actor's name and it's completely escaping me. I'm sure I know it. I mean, obviously I know it. He said that Gabriel thought that Elizabeth Taylor's eyes, Elizabeth Taylor, a famous actress, had violet eyes. He thought that they were just so great that he was just going to take them. Exactly how he did that, or if that has anything to do with anything in canon, is anybody's guess. Who made the decision to actually, John Hamm, thank you. Who made the decision to make his eyes violet? But that was John Hamm's take on it. All right, so we're going to jump to mirrors real quick. So this was really interesting as I was looking for my little icons. Again, symbols. I didn't find a picture of a mirror, but I did find this great one of people swapping. And I think that is a perfect segue into some of the things that mirrors will show us in the show. There's another point to be made, which is obviously not going to be made in the next 4 minutes, about the use of the color red and the color white, or the lighting as far as red and white. I think that was somewhat of a way to do some definition, also shadow and light, and looking at heaven and hell in different ways and using color and lighting to point that out. But that's not what this is about. It's about mirrors. So here we have one of the first uses of mirrors, which is where Aziraphale glances to his left in the sushi restaurant and does not see Crowley. He sees a reflection of his boss behind him. We see a lot of mirrors around Madame Tracy. I didn't actually grab a screenshot of the most important one, I feel, which is when she first looks in the mirror and sees that Aziraphale is within her. But it's definitely showing a reflection of characters, a reflection of people being different people, people being who you see them as in the mirror. We do see him again reflected, and again, I didn't screenshot this one, but we see Crowley when he's looking at the M5 on M25 on fire in the Bentley. He looks at himself in the rearview mirror. So not a ton, but it sounds like we're getting down to the wire here. Thank you all for attending, for listening to me babble on for all this time. Definitely check out the meta panel if this was the kind of stuff that you're into. Definitely reach out for me, or reach out to me. Let me jump to my final. You can actually find the recording of this under sessions. You'll have to flip the little switch to see it. Here's all the references, which will be at the end of my, oh, thanks, I see the little picture of Aziraphale in the mirror in the chat. Definitely reach out if you'd like to see the references. They're great. Thanks everybody. Here's my Twitter, Apollo Just. So, or you can reach out to me on Tumblr at Suvrock, and I will definitely share my slides with you. Thanks everybody.